Hello, hello. I am Sinner, and I am back with another episode of Leviathan Times. This is episode 7. Um, it's modern politics and word magic. This is a series where I just go over Substack articles I've written and talk about them. Um, in this one, I talk about a sort of political issue. It's not really a political issue, but more of like an issue with how people talk about politics. I find it more pervasive among left-wing progressive types, and it's an issue of word making reality, words making reality, and sort of this sort of word magic um, way of dealing with politics. So the first like issue I come across, and this whole thing is just me ranting about personal experiences basically. The first thing I talk about is the issue of actually forming an argument. So an argument needs to be an affirmation that is then substantiated by some sort of justification. There needs to be some sort of substantiation to whatever statement you make. So generally speaking, you might think it's completely fine to just say, grass is green and leave it at that. But if you're making an argument, maybe that's obvious to you, right? But is it obvious to everyone? Rather, you should say something like, grass is green because every time I see grass, it's green, right? Grass is green because this study was done and it also affirms that it's green. Something, there needs to be some sort of argument made. There needs to be some sort of justification. In the article, I give the example of apples, right? If I'm trying to make an argument that um, I'll read the example actually, it'll be easier. So an argument might look like this: apples come from trees. This apple I'm holding is not currently on a tree. Therefore, at some point in the past, this apple was attached to a tree. It's not attached now, but it was at some point in the past. Whereas that's completely different to just saying like this apple was on a tree before, or going like this apple was on a tree before because earlier it was on a tree, right? Just saying the affirmation or using a repetition of the affirmation as your argument doesn't work. And if I'm debating some random person on Discord or whatever it may be, you see this a lot. You see this where it's like the justification is the affirmation and the affirmation is the justification. It creates a non-argument, um, and it makes it very hard to engage with people have a different idea of the world than you if they can't make the arguments um, necessary to actually properly disagree with you. So the next um, point is mantras. Just because something's repeated a lot, it doesn't actually make it true. That should be obvious, but you see it a lot where people use a mantra or a slogan or a catchphrase as some sort of proof that it's true. Um, and I list off certain things like insert ideological position is a human right, X lives matter, make country great again, ACAB. Another recent one. I'm not pro Trump, but taco is one that's been going around. Trump always chickens out. Like whether or not it's true, just saying taco doesn't mean anything, right? It just makes you look stupid. Um, and like, yeah, so these mantras are very popular among all sorts of like, among the right and the left, admittedly. Um, but the core problem here is should be obvious, right? Uh, Something that's popular isn't true. A meme isn't true just because it's a meme. you have to actually make an argument. This is another version of a non-argument, um, repeating a mantra. It really surprises me how far, you know, how well The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon and um, how well, with the affirmation, repetition, contagion thing, and how well Brave New World holds up on this front, where it's just like people will believe things just so long as it's repeated enough. It's actually scarily true. And the next thing, and this is mainly the core issue I had, which caused me to write this article, was definitional games and using definitions as like magic to make things not true come true, right? So the problem is, right, a word is a referent, okay? A word refers to an identity, or a concept or a thing, right? So if you change the definition of a word, you change whatever that word is referring to. So it stops referring to whatever it was previously referring to. So I give the example dog, right? If I change the definition of dog to furry quadruped, then I can then argue, yeah, I can argue that cats, giraffes, donkeys, rats, they're all dogs, but it then becomes an error for me to say something like, um, cats, by this definition, are dogs, and all dogs are canines, therefore cats are canines. Because in that definition, I would be jumping between the two definitions of dog. And you see this with hate, generally speaking, which bounces between like an actual like the traditional term hate versus just disagreeing. Um, you see this with the word racism. What does racism mean? Well, it could mean an unjust prejudice against someone of a particular ethnic group, um, or it could mean to believe that there's biological differences between people, or it could mean um, that it could be it could describe an institution that is functionally meritocratic, but for whatever reason produces unequal outcomes, right? So America's racist because America's racist because black people are poorer than whites on average, even though institutionally, legally speaking, it's egalitarian. Same thing with Australia and Britain or wherever. So you have all these different definitions of racist, and then people jump around between them to and equivocate, right? Um, to suit their needs, So like this can lead to arguing that like someone's racist for um, believing one thing, and then like equivocating it to him hating the other races. And a similar thing plays out with transphobia and homophobia, where you have this thing where, on the one hand, transphobia and homophobia will mean like hatred and irrational hatred of whatever it is, and on the other hand, it'll mean a disagreement. So, right, are you transphobic because you hate trans people, or are you transphobic because you agree with the effectiveness of you disagree with the effectiveness of gender affirming care? It could be either, right? And then what they'll do is they'll be like, okay, well that's transphobic if you say the one thing, and then we go, well, it's like, well, I don't hate them, and they go, no, well actually it is technically, so it becomes like an equivocation, and it's one of the things that made me write this article is when I really thought about it, I had a debate with my friend actually about Charlie Kirk, um, and it led me to write this article because he came up with this new definition of deserved, where deserved meant leading. to the circumstances that cause whatever it is that it causes, right? So like, you know, for example, uh, let's say you're drunk and you you say very, very rude things to someone, and then that person punches you, right? Well, in a way, you deserve to be punched because you led up, you contributed to the circumstances that resulted in that person acting against you. And then he made the argument, well, because Charlie Kirk was pro-gun and inflammatory, controversial, he deserved to be killed because he, in a way, contributed to himself being killed, right? In this like consequentialist kind of way. And then I said to him, and it happened like 1,000 times. I said to him, I was like, okay, well, by that definition, if there's a woman who, um, you know, dresses scantily, um, walks down an alleyway at night without protection, um, in a dangerous area, then in a way, if she gets assaulted, then she deserved it. Or Martin Luther King deserved to be shot, right? Because he was controversial and all of that. And then he went, oh, no, 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 they don't deserve it. That's because they didn't like, they weren't bad people, basically. And then that was his argument. Was like, so he's using a new definition for deserved just specifically only for Charlie Kirk, and then not using it for anyone else. And he kept equivocating and jumping between these two definitions in the argument, and it really frustrated me. But it goes deeper to, I think, a question of, is it like equivocation? Is it like deliberate, word games to sort of beat someone in an argument? Or does it go deeper than that? And I would actually suspect that it does for a lot of people. I think a lot of people buy into the relativistic, socially constructed view of reality that our lived experiences are mainly a result of sort of our personal projections in a way, societal projections. So the only reason we define an apple as an apple is because society says so. And if we call apples oranges, then they are oranges, and that's it. That's as far as it goes. And I think what that results in, this idea that you can use language to transform reality itself, despite, obviously it causes delusion, but beyond that, I think it's something that a lot of left wingers buy into. I can say it's true, and it will be true, like words spoken into reality. So it's, I think, problematic because how are you meant to argue with someone? How are you meant to rationally debate someone if they can just define themselves as correct and then they are, and that's it, you know? Or define something as bad or define something as good and then say that that's magically special, or that they can magically equivocate words and it's just okay. It's symptomatic of something deeper and more wrong with current political discourse. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. I'm Sarah. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.